separate video for the Mina because uploading 45-minute long videos takes way too much internet, and yeah, so we're gonna talk about this in this video. So this is on page 806 in volume 2 of your Norton. This is a really like weird and interesting work and like problematic work. So I really do wish like we had class where we could all discuss it, because I mean there's so much in this manifesto, and like there's so much when we think about like the issues of modernism and the ways that modernism was kind of like exclusionary, and also the ways in which it was like pushing boundaries. I just feel like it's like all in here, right? So okay, so the description of it I actually think is like really helpful. So Feminist or Manifesto was written during Loy's association with F.T. Marinetti, who wrote the Futurist Manifesto, which is also in this book, but never published during her lifetime. It survives in a copy sent to a friend, the writer Mabel Dodge Lewin, in 1914. Loy's central demand is sexual freedom, the end of the divide between the mistress and the mother, and the destruction of women's attachment to ideals of their own purity. Loy's modernist call for women's free sexual expression appeals to elite women's sense of race and class privilege, echoing 19th century alarms that granting women life choices beyond marriage and childbearing would lead to white race suicide. Loy urges superior women to embrace maternity as both a responsibility and an aspect of their own sexual development. So on the one hand, she is calling for sexual liberation for women, which is a good thing, and on the other hand, she's coming from basically like a eugenics standpoint of like white women who are wealthy should like reproduce as much as they can and not wait for a man to help them reproduce, because then you can keep making more of what she saw as the superior race. So not good. Which also, I mean, Margaret Sanger, like who started she started Planned Parenthood basically, like she also argued that women should have sexual freedom, or that birth control should exist so that like less desirable women would stop reproducing. So there's always been this kind of like disgusting eugenicist like undercurrent when it comes to women's sexual freedom, which sucks. So we're gonna look through this and see what she's saying and see why it's like an important, or I guess interesting modernist text. Okay, so first of all, probably the first thing you notice about this when you look at it is that the way it is written is weird, right? Like it's, I mean, you can see in the book, right? It's like bold and different sized fonts and like underlined and stuff. So this was like a thing with manifestos. Manifestos were meant to be sort of like angry in their tone. A big part of their rhetoric was like, we're done with the old ways and we're starting the new ways, and like screw everything that came before. So there's definitely like an aggressive tone here, and the way that she has these giant letters adds to that. And it also like makes language new in the way that modernists were always doing. Okay, so the feminist movement as at present instituted is inadequate. So she is essentially saying that women must destroy the system, right? There is no half measure, no scratching on the surface of the rubbish heap of tradition will bring about reform. The only method is absolute demolition. And when you read this, you can kind of assume, or like, you know, I think a modern reader would assume that she means demolish all systems that are oppressive. But this is something you see again and again, right? In these like sort of like white feminist movements. It's like, destroy the system, but not too much. So she specifically means that the system of like marriage and the value placed on feminine purity needs to be destroyed. She says to her audience, which would be an audience of wealthy white women, professional and commercial careers are opening up for you. Is that all you want? So the use of rhetorical questions to say to women like, hey, have you considered maybe we could have more liberty than just what we're given with careers, right? Maybe we can go further. And so she says that woman is not the equal of man. She says, and if you honestly desire to find your level without prejudice, be brave and deny at the outset that pathetic claptrap war cry, woman is the equal of man. She is not. And so then she kind of breaks down what she sees as the difference between men and women. So she's looking at two different like binaries here, right? And I think I talked about this in another lecture for this class. It might have been a different class. But a binary is just when there are like two different sides to something. This was a different class. So like the gender binary is like male, female, and some people would argue there is nothing in between, and then the gender binary is criticized as being really restrictive, right? Because if you don't feel like a man or a woman, like you have to really work to get out from under this kind of like societally imposed binary. Other binaries would be like, I don't know, seeing things in black and white. Like that would be a binary way of seeing the world, good and evil. There's nothing in between. So she is looking at the gender binary, and she takes that as absolute truth, and she says that women and men should remain masculine and feminine, right? Like she likes those traits. But she says women need to look to themselves to find out what it means to be truly feminine, because, as she says here, as conditions are at present constituted, you have the choice between parasitism and prostitution or negation. Okay, so parasitism, that is when you are a parasite. And so I think what she's getting at here is that, again, wealthy upper class women, this was not the choice for all women at the time by any means. For wealthy upper class women, they had the choice of living off of their husbands, right? They could just not work and stay in the house all the time and just live off their husband's money. So that would be sex parasitism, which is also which is a term coined by Olive Schreiner, and you can look that up if you want. Olive, like the vegetable, fruit, not sure. Olive Schreiner. Okay, so you could be a parasite and live off your husband. You could be a prostitute and live off of, again, your sex. So she doesn't seem to think prostitution is a valid choice either. Or negation. So negation is just like denial, right? So negation would be like self-denial. So women are essentially, in the system as she sees it now, negated completely. They don't get to have their own identity, and instead are just trying to say we are equal to men, as opposed to saying here's what women are and here's how that's valuable and important in a way that has nothing to do with how women fit into society, like as men's equal or superior or inferior or any of that. So I hope that makes sense. And then she really hammers home that binary after. Men and women are enemies. So you see, like the tone here is aggressive. It is what's the word I'm trying to think of? Like inflammatory. It's probably not going to convince someone who doesn't already agree with her. So then she wants to demolish this other binary. Actually, I'm going to open my window really quick. It's like hot in here and I can't have the AC on while I film because my phone is on the air conditioner right now. So hang on. Alright. That's nice. Okay. So she talks about this binary of the mistress and the mother. Um, the first illusion it is to your interest to demolish is the division of women into two classes, the mistress and the mother. Every well-balanced and developed woman knows that is not true. Nature has endowed the complete woman with a faculty for expressing herself through all her functions. There are no restrictions. The woman who is so incompletely evolved as to be unself-conscious in sex will prove a restrictive influence on the temperamental expansion of the next generation. The woman who is a poor mistress will be an incompetent mother, an inferior mentality, and will enjoy an inadequate apprehension of life. So she is essentially saying here that the mistress represents woman as like a sexual being, and the mother represents women as not sexual beings, and instead as just like their job is to be nurturing and raise their children and take care of the household and be domestic, right? This is also sometimes called like the Madonna whore binary. It's definitely still something you see today, like in art and stuff like that. So what she's saying in this paragraph is a little hard to get at, but she basically means that like a woman who has denied her sexual side will be a bad mother, and a woman who has denied her maternal side will be a bad mistress. And to be a complete woman, you have to be able to do both. All right. The first greatest sacrifice you have to make is of your virtue. And here, she makes the craziest, like, claim that I think, well, there's a lot of crazy claims in this manifesto, but this one's crazy. She says, the first self-enforced law for the female sex as a protection against the man-made bogey of virtue, which is the principal instrument of her subjection, would be the unconditional surgical destruction of virginity throughout the female population at puberty. So she is saying that women should have their hymens surgically removed. So this is crazy. But also, think again with like modernism, and the manifesto was all about just kind of burning it down. So I don't think she really meant this. Maybe she did. Probably didn't though. So it's just like a really, she makes extreme claims in order to get her audience to consider less extreme alternatives that are still in the wheelhouse of what she's trying to accomplish. So it's kind of like a rhetorical device, hyperbole, I hope. Okay, so I really think this paragraph is interesting. Like, I think this is where this is a strong manifesto to me and actually has like really good ideas in it. So the fictitious value of woman as identified with her physical purity is too easy a standby, rendering her lethargic in the acquisition of intrinsic merits of character by which she could obtain a concrete value. So what she's essentially saying is that women, as it stood at the time, were seen as like marriageable if they were still virgins, if they were physically pure. And she's saying that that's a problem, because if women who are virgins when they get married think that's like the only way that they're valuable, then they won't have put any time into becoming valuable in other ways, like maybe, I don't know, going to school or something. And so she's also saying that that purity is the principal instrument of her subjection. So women were seen as good or bad, valuable or worthless, based on whether or not they were physically pure, whether or not they were virgins. And we do still see this in society today, right? Like, there's a lot more emphasis on women's virginity as being valuable versus men's virginity being valuable. Like, I've never seen anyone give their son a purity ring. Maybe it happens, but I've never seen it. So she's saying that if the ideal of feminine purity was totally removed, then we wouldn't have to think about it at all, right? Like, women would not be subjected anymore based on whether or not they were virgins. So the value of man is assessed entirely according to his use or interest to the community, but the value of women or woman, depends entirely on chance, her success or insuccess in maneuvering a man into taking the lifelong responsibility of her. So basically, men are judged by what they do for the world, women are judged by whether they were able to convince a guy to marry them. The advantages of marriage are too ridiculously ample compared to all other trades, for under modern conditions, a woman can accept preposterously luxurious support from a man without return of any sort, even offspring, as a thank offering for her virginity. So Loy sees marriage at the time as a woman trading her virginity to a man for like a life of luxury and money. So again, audience here is going to be wealthy white women. And it's a really, it's an interesting take on marriage, right? I'm not sure that this was true of all marriages at the time, but that's how Loy sees it. The woman who has not succeeded in striking that advantageous bargain is prohibited from any but surreptitious reaction to life stimuli and entirely debarred maternity. So if you have not been able to find a man to marry you, you can't become a mother. She then says every woman has a right to maternity. So there's a lot of really interesting arguments in here that are perhaps somewhat jarring to find all in the same document, right? So she's saying on the one hand that women need to have a lot more sexual freedom, and also that all women should be able to have children. You should not have to have a man in your life in order to have a child. And then she says that women have, so this is where it gets kind of eugenicist, or actually it gets completely eugenicist. Every woman of superior intelligence should realize her race responsibility in producing children in adequate proportion to the unfit or degenerate members of her sex. So she believes that wealthy, white, educated women should be reproducing as much as what she sees as lesser women, right? So poor women, non-white women, etc., less educated women. So it's kind of horrifying, right? And it's interesting because we talked in our last recorded lecture a little bit about, or maybe we talked about this in class too, but modernism was on the one hand this really revolutionary artistic movement in which you saw art that was responding to a completely changed world. I think it's where we start to see poetry and fiction look the way they still look today. If you're, if you're in class and you're sick of reading poems that rhyme and are in perfect sonnet forms or whatever, modernism will be interesting to you, because that's where you start to recognize oh, this looks like the art that I might see today, right? This is something that is easier to read because I recognize this as the language I use in my own life. So in that sense, modernism was really making things new and changing things for the better. But then on the other hand, as we talked about, there was this really strong fascist undercurrent to it too. T.S. Eliot, very anti-Semitic. Ezra Pound literally went to Germany to be a Nazi. And Mina Loy here is on the one hand saying women need to burn all the systems down so that they can be liberated, but then on the other hand saying that actually they need to, in some ways, need to do this so that they can maintain a system in which white women continue, wealthy white women in particular, continue to subjugate poor women and women of color. So I don't know, to me that's always been kind of that's the great contradiction of modernism, right? How can art that's so interesting and so concerned with a new and changing world, and in many ways embracing that new and changing world, how can art like that also be so fascist? So yeah, I don't know. I think this manifesto kind of captures that. So then she says, women should have, superior women should have children throughout their lives. So a child should be the result of a definite period of psychic development in her life, and not necessarily of a possibly irksome and outworn continuance of an alliance, spontaneously adapted for vital creation in the beginning, but not necessarily harmoniously balanced as the parties to it follow their individual lines of personal evolution. So she doesn't really believe in marriage here, right? She thinks that a marriage, like at first it might work because you joined forces in order to reproduce, but ultimately you're going to follow your own personal evolutions. You need to like be, I don't know, you need to be single to do that, I guess, or to remain happy while you do that and to not get held back by someone else. Okay. It's also interesting how she says here, there's some more eugenicist, racist stuff here, and then she says woman must become more responsible for the child than man, which I think is interesting because women were more responsible for the children than men. But I think she's saying that the, like I guess the way it was would be, and the way that it honestly still is in a lot of situations, women are more likely to be responsible for the child once the child has been born, and to be the one who does like all that work of like raising the child and being nurturing and whatever. But I think what she's getting at is that men had the most responsibility because they were the ones who could decide whether or not to marry you. Like, it was definitely all up to the man whether or not, like, a woman was getting married. You still don't see that many women proposing today, right? So, women, to her, needed to come to a place of sexual freedom and then having children without men around. And, like, this was written in 1914. I feel like we still don't see that many women doing this, which is kind of, I don't know, kind of interesting. Then she says, women must destroy in themselves the desire to be loved, which is interesting, right? I don't know. I want to know what you guys think of that. So maybe if you want to put that in the discussion thread, like why does she think that women must destroy in themselves the desire to be loved? The feeling that it is a personal insult. So these are the things that a woman has to destroy. So destroy these things. The feeling that it is a personal insult when a man transfers his attentions from her to another woman. The desire for comfortable protection instead of an intelligent curiosity and courage in meeting and resisting the pressure of life. Sex or so-called love must be reduced to its initial element, honor, grief, sentimentality, pride, and consequently jealousy must be detached from it. Okay, so she's saying the initial element of love is honor, and that grief, sentimentality, pride, and jealousy must be detached from it. So you should not grieve when someone leaves you. Sentimentality is like romance or like, that kind of like mushy feeling. That shouldn't have a place in love. Pride, so when your feelings are hurt because you're like, I don't know, like embarrassed because someone left you. And then jealousy. All of that to her has no place in love, which is an interesting take. Woman, for her happiness, must retain her deceptive fragility of appearance. So you should keep looking fragile, but combine that with indomitable will, irreducible courage, and abundant health, the outcome of sound nerves. So that's interesting. Let's see. And she also needs to destroy the illusion of sex as impure. So she finally ends this manifesto by saying, there is nothing impure in sex except in the mental attitude to it. And if women can get rid of this illusion, it will constitute an incalculable and wider social regeneration than it is possible for our generation to imagine. So this is like a very pro-sexual liberation document, and like keep in mind that that's a big thing that was happening in the early 1900s, right? So this was a little bit before the 20s, but like so much of the 20s was about like sexual liberation for women, like flappers, you know, like short dresses, stuff like that. Men had always pretty much been sexually liberated. They could really kind of do whatever they wanted, maybe like don't, you know, talk about it all the time or whatever in mixed company. But she's addressing women and saying that women need to be sexually liberated as well. And then to turn that sexual liberation into a kind of maternal liberation where women are reproducing in order to maintain the harmony of the race. So this is a weird document, but I think it's interesting, and yeah, I mean, I was hoping to do this in class because it's something that like I think requires discussion, because it's, on the one hand, I guess because its ideas are like so mixed and strange, and I don't think we're used to the argument that like women should be like mothers whenever they want to and also be sexually liberated. Like I think the combination of those two arguments is a little like uncommon. So anyway, I think I've exhausted that. So if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the Moodle discussion forum, and I will totally answer those for you. And yeah, so for next week, we're going to be doing T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. So I will probably end up doing 2 lectures on that. This is kind of shaping up to just be like class, but like more of me talking, which is probably not a good thing, but oh well. And then the week after that, we're going to be doing the Harlem Renaissance. So, yeah, I guess be working on your essays. Email me if you have any questions. I can probably give you guys somewhat of an extension on those as well, because, you know, the world is crazy right now, and we're all kind of adapting to this new normal, I guess. Alright, so I hope you guys are all staying safe, taking vitamin C, eating your oranges, taking deep breaths, and I'll see you next time.